Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Explorers, which is episode 22 of season 3 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the third season episode Explorers. So Explorers is the episode in which Sisko would like to recreate a flight of ancient Bajorans using an ancient Bajoran spaceship, where it's rumored that they traveled to Cardassia way before Cardassians were capable of space travel, and the Cardassian Authority, of course, is very much against this theory because it puts them as inferior, so they try to say it's nonsense, and they don't like that Sisko is trying to recreate this flight. And Sisko wants his son Jake to go with him, and at first Jake blows him off, but then Jake agrees to go, and they spend some quality father-son time together where he reveals he wants to be a writer and he's considering leaving the station to go to a writing school. However, the ship gets into some trouble and it comes across some space eddy or whatever BS, and it ends up making it fly really fast, and it goes to Cardassia, proving the Cardassians were wrong and the Bajorans did really fly to Cardassia. And there's a side plot about Bashir wanting to talk to this person who went to his Starfleet Academy with them, Starfleet Medical, and she got valedictorian, and he was second to her, and so he's always jealous of her, and she thinks that she's ignoring him, and he gets really upset and gets drunk with O'Brien, but then realizes that she didn't even know who he was and thought that Bashir was an Andorian, and then they hit it off. So, before I get into my feelings about the episode, I want to talk about, again, personal experience. And some people I know might be bored with this, but whatever. So, growing up, I grew up in the Baltimore, Washington, D.C. area, as I talked about before. And there was a amusement park, a lot of theme parks nearby. There was Busch Gardens in Virginia, Williamsburg. It was like a 3-hour drive from where I lived. But we went there a couple times, and we used to get the commercials for Busch Gardens on the Washington stations, which I used to watch. And there was a ride that Busch Gardens, owned by Anheuser-Busch, it was a really beer-themed theme park, which is, great for the kiddies. But anyway, there was this ride because it was supposed to be European medieval type themed, and there was this ride called Questor, which was a motion capture ride where you get into this room and the room shakes and it's on motion things, the type of rides. I think Captain EO and it was the same thing, but anyway, yeah, it's called Questor, and so you're supposed to be in this medieval wizard type craft, traveling around the wilderness and bullshit. And I remember we used to see the commercials for this all of the fucking time. I can't remember if I ever actually went on it. I think I did go on it once, but I was mainly remembered for the commercials. It would advertise the shit out of it. And I remember that actually, if you go on to YouTube and YouTube Questor, they have someone videotaped the ride back in the 90s. It's not around anymore, but you can go on YouTube and watch the whole thing, because they played the pre-recorded video each time and the thing would shake or whatever. But the reason why I bring it up is because the craft of Questor looked like this ancient Bajoran craft. So I remember my sister in particular would always refer to this as the Questor episode. The episode where Sisko takes his son to Busch Gardens and they go right Questor. I don't know how accurate that is. I haven't gone back and looked at what the Questor thing looked like, but I always associate that now. I always call this the Questor episode. But anyway, now getting into my feelings for this episode, I'm going to say something somewhat controversial or something that people may disagree with, because there does seem to be a lot of love for this episode. I heard a lot of people speak very highly of this episode, and here's my controversial statement. I actually like the B plot better than the A plot. Sorry, I apologize. I do, but I'm sorry, I do. As it's always my mission statement. In fact, I should put this as one of my, in the channel description. I think I will add it to it. My mission statement is to always be honest. Always give my honest opinion, even if that said opinion does not match popular opinion. Now, I will get to the B plot shortly, but let me start with the A plot, with the Benjamin and Jake going off on Questor. Now, here's the thing. I hear a lot of people say that they love it because it's a great character story between Jake and Ben, and it shows the father and son dynamic that they have now. And, in general, I've heard a lot of people talk about how important it was to Avery Brooks in particular, but also the writers, that they portray a very positive father and son relationship between two black people, because there was not that much examples of that in the 90s on TV. You got the Cosby Show, which you don't even get into the retrospective look of it, but and a few other shows, maybe Family Matters, I can't remember, that came out before or after this episode aired, but a few of it. But in general, fathers, it was stereotyping to the African American fathers as being estranged or not really caring for their sons. So it was great so they went out of their way, since this is Star Trek, is a utopian future and everything's perfect. They thought it was important to show this relationship, and I agree. I totally agree, and I do like the Jake and Benjamin relationship. I think it was handled much better in a particular episode that's coming up shortly at the start of season 4. The one of the best episodes of the show. This one, however, here's the thing. So I do agree with the character moments between Jake and Ben. I do like some of just seeing them shoot the shit and talk about going to school, and Jake trying to hook him up with Cassidy Yates and all that sort of jibber jabber. But the thing is that I don't think that actually takes up the majority of the A plot. And my problem with the A plot is the whole, it's a Bajoran sailing ship, and a ship that's just like a sail ship, and they sail the solar winds, and Benjamin's gonna build it from scratch and try to prove the Cardassians wrong, and Gul Dukat's gonna call him up and be like, oh, how dare you do this thing, and then finally they hit the subspace eddy, and they fly there, and they prove the Cardassians wrong, and there's fireworks. All that stuff I think is nonsense. I am not only am I disinterested in that and could not care less about it, I think it's silly. I just really, this is what we're going to spend an episode on. I get the character. Let's have a character story between father and son. Fine. They do that much better in The Visitor. Ooh, I gave away which episode I'm talking about. You couldn't figure it out. But anyway, they do it much better. And this is kind of it's a weak reason to do. If you want to have a good episode that showcases the great relationship for Benjamin and Jake, then have it an interesting episode. Don't just come up with some BS excuse to have the threat or the adventure or whatever. First of all, Questor is really impractical. It looks silly, and it kind of reminds me of that movie. I know it came out after this, but the treasure planet, where it was obviously a takeoff of Treasure Island, and so all of the spaceships looked like sailing ships, which is so impractical, and it's just that threw me off. And this is kind of reminds me that they want to be like, oh, it's like a sailing ship, they sail the solar wind. It's like, that's not how fucking spaceships work, and that's just dumb. I know, and I don't know. See, I don't know the actual, science. I'm sure someone who knows more might come on and be like, well, actually, it would be practical for them to do this. I don't care. It just looks impractical. It looks dumb. It doesn't fit with Star Trek. And plus, like, who the fuck cares if the ancient Bajorans flew for Cardassia first? Like, I don't care. That is not an interesting plot to hang the whole fucking episode on. And the whole thing with Dukat calling him up and be like, "Ooh, are you sure you want to go?" Like, this is, I couldn't care less about that. And then at the end, when Dukat's like, "Oh, congratulations, and just so happens that your arrival coincides with us discovering evidence that Bajorans first came here. Oh, what a coincidence." Like, that's, first of all, it's making Dukat too friendly. And even though I know he was trying to intimidate Sisko a little bit at the start, he was still, like, denying it. It's like, "Oh, of course I am not threatening you," or whatever. But it's still, especially the ending where they're doing fireworks and bullshit, is that's making Dukat too friendly. Now here's the thing I was thinking about. So this proves that the Bajorans made the flight. I'll get back to this later, but it was proved that the Bajorans made the flight to Cardassia. Like, I can't remember the time frame, but it was a long time ago. Long before they figured the Cardassians had any interstellar travel, and they crashed on Cardassia. So they found this ship crashed on Cardassia. So what happened to these poor fucking Bajorans who flew to the other planet? They crashed there. They were stranded there their whole lives because they don't have the technology to get back to Bajor. And there were definitely aliens living on an alien planet who had never seen an alien before, because this was before they discovered interstellar travel. This is before they were warp capable. So did they hide somewhere? Were they discovered by the Cardassian government? Like, even if you say this is because they talk about Cardassian history, and they weren't always like totalitarian, authoritarian, dictators, or Orwellian. They weren't always like this. They, talked about this in Chain of Command, where they used to be like more, artistic, and more art and literature was second to none, and more, different and more free, democratic. But even if they were like this when the Bajorans landed, they're still fucking aliens. They still, and so they lived and died in misery, being trapped on an alien world. They never even mentioned that. They're like, "Oh, let's celebrate these Bajorans who did this," and they died a horrible death and probably got captured by the Cardassian government and died under being, tortured or whatever, doing the scientific experiments or whatever. I'm just making that up. Or maybe they're hiding in a cave for the rest of their short lives. But, it kind of puts a damper on the celebration, I think. Now, so getting back to the space flight itself, here's what I'm thinking. So, Sisko said he recreated the ship, everything exactly the way it was, so it's authentic. The one difference that they made was that he put in a the anti-gravity, the artificial gravity thingy, because he said, being, low gravity or no gravity makes Sisko queasy. And of course, we know that this is just an excuse so they don't have to try to fake a, flight, no gravity environment. Because that's expensive to do. So, but anyway. So this could possibly explain why when Jake and Sisko, but Jake and Benjamin, when they encounter the subspace eddy or whatever the fuck it was that made them go basically at warp speed in order to get to Cardassia, this would explain, or could be used to explain, why the hell they didn't splat against against the ship wall immediately as soon as they started going at that high speed. If this is an ancient ship that doesn't have the inertial dampers and all this wacky technology that these 24th century ships have, then yeah, they should be spots on the wall. Anyone who watches The Expanse knows about this. Delta V, and they had a whole episode about that bolter guy who was like, oh, button, and he splats against the wall. Well, that was about him stopping suddenly after going high speed. But still, you get they start going to high speed all of a sudden, and they got to slow down, like spots on the wall. They all of a sudden start, but you could use the excuse that anti-grav or artificial grav thing that Sisko put in could also possibly have saved their lives. So that could be the explanation of why they weren't spots on the wall. But this gets back to the ancient Bajorans, because they figure, like Jake even says, oh, this is how the ancient Bajorans got there. They got trapped in the subspace that he took them to Cardassia. Then why the fuck weren't they spots on the wall? Because they clearly didn't have this futuristic anti-grav or artificial gravity technology. So they should have fucking been spots on the wall. Maybe, I guess you could say, they were spots on the wall and the ship just fell out of orbit and crashed on the planet. So they died before they even got to Cardassia. So all my theories about them being trapped on an alien planet might have just been bullshit. They had died just by getting there, and the ship just crashed on its own and they found it there. So, and again, that's still, if that's the case, that still kind of puts a dampener on the whole, oh, Bajorans made it here. And actually they didn't. There were spots on the wall by the time they got there. But anyway, who cares about practicality? But, the whole Jake and Ben bonding or whatever, and Jake mentioning that he wants to be a writer. So there's three major things introduced in this episode that will become major plot points for the show going forward. First is the introduction of Leeta, which I will talk to shortly when I get to the B plot. Second is Jake wanting to be a writer. So we already got in season 2, they already fucked up the show by saying Jake doesn't want to join Starfleet, and now Robert Hewitt Wolf's analogy is complete because for him, he didn't join the military like his family tradition said it was. Instead, he became a writer. So they had Jake do the same thing, even though Starfleet isn't really the military, but it kind of is. He didn't join Starfleet, his tradition, his family instead became a writer. The third thing that this episode introduced was, of course, Cassidy Yates. Of course, she doesn't actually appear until the next episode, but she's first mentioned in this episode. Jake first brings her up as trying to set up Benjamin on a date with her. So, yeah. 3 major things. The writing thing, I kind of look back on this less favorably in retrospect, after knowing what they did with this and what we got from it is episodes like The Muse. Now, you could argue we also got The Visitor from it, sure, but other than that, did we got The Muse, or just nothing. He became a nothing character and suddenly turned into a journalist, which is completely different from a fictional writer. But anyway, so they didn't know what to do with him. They did not know how to fit a novelist into this show. And it kind of ruined him, and Nog became a more important character than he did. But I talked about this at length and other things. I mean, I did like the conversation he was talking about, like his short story. I did, having written short stories myself when I was younger and getting people's opinion, and people were like, oh yeah, it shows potential, and how upsetting it is to hear that as feedback. Or the worst feedback, although DS9 will touch on this in season 5. But as a writer, the worst feedback I could possibly get is everyone nitpicking the grammar and not speaking on the substance at all. Unless that's what I asked them to do, then that is so incredibly rude. Like, correct grammar if you want, but just to do that when I want your honest opinion on the story is, I think, one of the most frustrating things ever. And of course, Nog does this to Jake later in season 5. But so I can kind of relate to that, at the way that Benjamin's like, oh, it shows potential, and Jake's like, what? But here's the thing, there's a reason for that. Like, and I look back on like my earlier works when I was younger, and they're crap. But I didn't see them as crap at the time, but they are objectively crap. And I'm sure Jake's, as good as a writer as he is, was not that good either, because it was one of his first works. Like, writing, like any other craft, you have to work at it and repeat it and improve it and get better. Your first attempt is not going to be a piece of art. So, and I like how Benjamin was kind of navigating that. He didn't quite, go out and say, well, this sucks, you can't be a writer. And then he was like, no, you're showing potential. Like, this is a good start. There's areas you can improve in, but it shows that you have what it takes to be a writer, but this work itself is needs improvement. Which, in retrospect, even how much you don't want to hear that, that's actually the best thing you could hear, because if you don't hear this shows potential, then you're really in trouble. But yeah, so I could relate to that, and that was interesting. I thought it was interesting hearing them talk about the Maquis, and because the story apparently was about a Maquis, and I like how Jake kind of faked them out, and Benjamin was like, oh, wait, how would you know if you wouldn't know what it's like to be in the Maquis unless you're in the Maquis? And Jake's like, oh, I can't talk about it. And Benjamin was like freaking out the way he looked at him, and he was like, haha, I got you. I'm kind of thinking, like, in the back of Benjamin's mind, he was kind of thinking, is he joking? And maybe that's a way they could have made Jake more interesting, actually have him join the Maquis. Maybe they should have done that. Then they could have figured out what to fucking do with him instead of meeting the goddamn muse. Yeah, other than that, like, Jake trying to set up Benjamin. It was interesting that the reason why Jake was hesitant to go to Wellington, New Zealand, by the way, which is where, of course, I lived. I love Wellington, New Zealand. Would love to go back there. Lived there for 8-9 years or whatever. Great city. Jake should definitely go there. Fuck Deep Space Nine. No, I'm just kidding. I'd probably stay at Deep Space Nine too. But yeah. But the reason why he was hesitant to go was because he was worried about his father being lonely. And so he thought, well, if he had some companionship, then maybe I wouldn't be as worried. But I like how, again, Benjamin sort of counters this while saying, I'll agree to meet for the date as long as you do not base your decision of whether or not you're leaving on how well the date goes. But of course, we do know, in retrospect, if you've seen the show, it does work out quite well for Benjamin in the long run. But Jake still stays because he's still a main cast member, even though the writers don't fucking know what to do with him. But anyway, so all that was all well and good, but I don't think it was enough to sustain the whole plot, which is why I prefer the B plot. So let's get into the B plot. The B plot's really simple, and I do like how there's no threat. Oh, I should have mentioned the thing in the A plot. There is a threat. The whole thing with, oh, the ship's falling apart and the sails, and oh, we're trapped and our things isn't working. Like, that has like threat of the week, generic threat of the week. And also, it's not really an anomaly, but it kind of is it's just a bullshit reason to make the ship be in danger so we can have a threat. Oh, it was so fake. And I just could not care less about it. And that's why I appreciate the B plot. Some people say it's boring. I think you'll hear some Patreon comments later saying that it's boring and it's no really point to it. But I think it's a really great character story. And there's a couple of things I really like about the B plot. First of all, the introduction of Leeta, which I gotta be honest, like, I was not thinking when I first saw this episode that she would be a main character. In fact, when she reappeared in Facets, which I think is the next time she appears again, I was like, who the fuck is this? I did not remember that it was the same person. And all of a sudden they're treating her like a main character. Like Dax is inviting her to take place in this huge ceremony. Oh, I invite all my best friends. Like, how is she one of your best friends? You just fucking met her and she like was trying to hook up with Julian. You were like cock blocking him. So when the hell did she become Judges? But anyway, we can talk about that more in Facets. But yeah, I didn't even recognize her. It wasn't until, after I saw the show, after I realized she became a main character, when I went back and watched this episode, I was like, oh yeah, this is the first time she appeared. Oh, how about that? Didn't know for a long time. But I love that scene where they're obviously like flirting with each other hard out. And she's like, oh, I need to go to the infirmary. I have a cough. And Julian's like, oh, that sounds really serious. I better examine you right now. And then Jadzia comes in to ask about some report or whatever. No, she's not asking about a report. She's just like shooting the shit or something. Coming to tell Julian about the Lexington arriving or whatever. And Julian's like, oh, yes, I forgot to have this report I needed to give you, and hands her the pad. It says, go away. I fucking love that. That is so great. But then, of course, she brings up, the Lexington, and then Julian actually does bug her off. But we do learn, I don't know when we learn this. I think they just casually mention it, but Julian does end up dating Leeta up until season 5. So I think that relationship took place almost entirely off screen. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't even mention it until they broke up in season 5. Maybe they did mention it sometime between then and then. I'll have to look out for it. But anyway, so Julian's, of course, all freaked out because the person who actually won the valedictorian is coming, and then he's freaking out and worrying about her coming. And then when she shows up, she walks right past him and doesn't even acknowledge his existence, and he's crushed, and he goes and gets shit-faced with O'Brien. Now, the scene is awesome. The scene is fucking gold. This is easily the best Julian O'Brien scene in the fucking whole show, hands down. This to see them shit faced and singing "Oh Jerusalem," and then having, because it's rare in Star Trek we actually see our characters like completely shit faced. Like Troy, there's the Troy scene in First Contact everyone knows about, but seeing Julian, if you ever been drunk before, you can see how relatable this is. Like, this is exactly how I or other people I know would act when they're drunk. And it's like, I'm going to go right up there and I'm going to give her a piece of my mind. And Miles is like, well, you might want to wait for tomorrow because right now you can barely stand up. And he's like, good point. Like, I think it was great drunk acting. By the way, not everyone can do drunk acting well. It's some of the best drunk acting I've seen. It was just a great camaraderie between the two characters. This scene, more than any other scene, has sold the O'Brien and Julian friendship to me. As not that bullshit in Armageddon game when they were talking about lost love and blah blah blah, who cares, but this scene when they get drunk together and while Visionary had some good scenes between them too, but this really sold it to me. The whole getting shit faced. And the other thing is, this is something else I find incredibly relatable, probably more relatable than I would like to admit. This aspect of Julian being all hung up about, oh, she hates me, she doesn't like me, and O'Brien's like, oh, she's in love with you, and turns out that she doesn't even recognize him, and that he's freaking out and worrying. Again, would loathe to admit how many times in my life I've done that, where I freaked out and I was worried. I was like, oh, this person hates me or whatever, and it turns out to be something really innocent and minor and not really. And so I can really relate to it, and I love how Julian has that flaw and that he's really like freaked out, and she goes up and finally has the guts to introduce himself to her, and she's like, oh, wait, you're Julian Bashir? Like, I thought you were in Dorian. And then they hit it off. And I think it's unfortunate that they don't show what happened to them. It would actually been really interesting that if they actually did hook up, but maybe that would be too obvious. I do like that they did hit it off, though, from more of a professional standpoint, which, was fascinating. And I did hear that this whole storyline might have been an analogy because this episode was written by Renee Echevarria, who originally wanted to go to Voyager, but Michael Pellier told him no and said, you have to go to Deep Space Nine. It's either Deep Space Nine or nothing. So he went to Deep Space Nine. And so that kind of relates to how, because Lindsay or Linz or whatever her name is, she got the valedictorian, so she got her choice of a job, so she went for the starship that travels into space but actually kind of finds it boring, and actually kind of envious of Julian, who gets to stay on Deep Space Nine. So it's kind of an analogy for Renee Echevarria about how he originally wanted the Voyager job but actually found that he loved the Deep Space Nine job better. Maybe. I don't know. That hasn't been confirmed, so don't quote me on that. But there's theories out there that this is what this storyline is about. But here's the thing. Getting into future spoilers, which I always do. This is the episode more than any other that disproves the whole Bashir was genetically engineered the whole time. This episode, this storyline, flat out does not compute, does not fit into this whole thing about him being genetically engineered. Because in this episode, it's very fucking clear that Julian is not faking this anxiety. He's not faking this nervousness. He's not faking the regret that he missed an easy question. And because the genetically engineered thing will have you believe that he purposely fucked up to keep people from telling that he's genetically engineered. But if that was the case, he wouldn't be all like have all this anxiety and all this nervousness around the fact that she got ahead of him. Like, it's obvious that he's a little bit jealous of her and held this regard, and also the whole thing about how it sort of makes him feel like maybe he's not good enough. Maybe he's not as good as a doctor as he'd like to think he is, and it kind of makes him feel inferior, none of which would be true if he fucked up on purpose. So this whole genetically engineered thing is complete and utter bullshit, but I talked about this a lot before, and I'll talk about it again when I get to that episode. It's the worst retcon in all of Star Trek, and it's such a bad retcon. It just does not fit. It's the writers being lazy, but anyway. I love this storyline because it's so human, and it's so relatable, and I love the fact that they didn't feel a need to make a threat. Now, granted, because it's a B plot, they can get away without a threat because they put the threat in the A plot. Oh no, the ship's falling apart. Oh, but I just love the simplicity of it, and plus it's funny. They got the drunk scene was amazing. That scene where he writes "Go away" on the pad was so hilarious. Like, it is such a good character story, such a good related storyline. So yeah, I don't feel guilty at all for saying that the B plot's better than the A plot, because it just flat out is. Anyway, I would now like to thank all of my Patreon supporters who support me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. This help me continue with the channel, help me keep going. And I'd like to give a big special thanks to Brandon Neilhouse and Jordan Johnson. Thank you both so very, very much for your strong support. Alright, so we do have a few other patron supporters that I would like to thank. I'd like to give a shout out to Tyler Cease, Benjamin Mead, Antarius, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Medijester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Miguelicio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and yeah, thank you so very much for your support. So, we have a few Patreon comments for this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, "Explorers more like sex poor." Do you remember that pun I did about poor sex from the episode Vortex? This is a revisiting of that hilarious pun that we all remember and love and quote so often. This episode was boring to me. I actually do remember this one, and I don't want Mark to tell me how much I like it. I don't care for it. It's not total booty crap, though. Mark, on a scale of Vic Fontaine to Endgame, where do you rate this one? Alright, so on a scale of Vic Fontaine to Endgame, I would rate this episode as I have had enough of you. I know I already made this joke, but I'm fucking doing it again because I couldn't think of anything else. Anyway, next comment is from Tyler Cease, who says, the heart of this episode, Explorers, is the standout episode because it highlights the deep emotional connection between father and son, Sisko and Jake. It's a fantastic example of how Deep Space Nine balances personal stories with the grander science fiction narrative. The concept of exploration, the theme of exploration, is central to this episode. It's not just about space exploration, but also the idea of exploring relationships and overcoming personal doubts. The story of the ancient Bajoran cell ship adds a unique historical layer to the episode. Character development. This episode does a lot for Sisko's character, showing his nurturing side and his willingness to let Jake grow up while also remaining a protective father. The dynamic between them continues to be one of the strongest aspects of the episode. Jake's growth. It's also great to see Jake developing into more than just Sisko's son, his willingness to take on the challenge of the solar sail ship, and the way he steps up to the occasion in a small but significant moment for his growth as a character. A beautifully simple story. In a series known for its complex political plots, Explorers offers a welcome change of pace. It's simple, heartwarming story that doesn't rely on big space battles or deep mysteries, and that's what makes it stand out. The Bajoran sailor ship. The sailor ship concept is intriguing and gives the episode a sense of historical exploration. It's a great nod to the past while still tying into the series' larger themes of culture and history, especially within the Bajoran context. Symbolism of the journey. The journey the Siskos take in the sail ship parallels the challenges and growth they experience their own relationship. It's a perfect metaphor for how they both continue to navigate and life and fatherhood. Final thoughts. Overall, Explorers is a touching episode that showcases the personal side of DS9 characters. It's proof that not every episode needs high stakes or intense drama to make impact. Sometimes the quieter moments are the most meaningful. Hope these suggestions help. Alright, so I mentioned before that this episode introduced 3 major changes. I'm actually wrong. It's 4 major changes. There's a very important 4th one, which I can't believe I forgot. That is Sisko's goatee. How could I forget about Sisko's goatee? Now, of course, in Way of the Warrior, this will become full circle when he shaves his head, and it will be his full end to his new look. But it begins here with his goatee, and then it will come to fruition in The Way of the Warrior, which I do believe I forgot to mention when I reviewed that episode, which I already did for my polls. So very poor insight for me that I forgot to mention that milestone of Way of the Warrior. It's got Sisko's new bald look, but the goatee starts here. Alright, so next comment is, let's see, from Norman Buckwald, who says, Explorers works for me as a good character episode between Sisko and Jake. In fact, after the definitive superior episode, The Visitor, I almost wish there were 1 or 2 more episodes like this that focused on the father and son bond. Mention of Cassidy Yates is first made, and for a quiet episode of those floating out there, no, they may not be stellar. But in this day and age of shorter seasons, I sometimes wish we had such bottle episodes here. The B story, the premise, and Bashir's issue is meh. But here's the thing, some of the best writing that represents a strong friendship that has definitely happened by now between Bashir and O'Brien occurs here and is so strong. I almost wish there was no resolution, or better yet, some other types of scenario, as it makes Bashir seem so trivial, especially after the awards B plot. Ducat doing the mea culpa, he's not that nice of a guy. There's a reason Blue Sky has him acting like some orange autocrat, which is more authentically Ducat. I'll give it 7 fireworks out of 10. Yes, completely agree. There's a reason why Ducat is portrayed as a kind of analogy to the orange autocrat. Yes, absolutely. And a good analogy it is. So yeah, I already mentioned I think he was being too nice. I think you're being too nice to this episode. I actually thought it was boring, but that is my humble opinion. I of course agree with you about the O'Brien-Bashir relationship, except I disagree about the part about the making Bashir seem trivial. To me, it's completely relatable. It makes him seem more human, but more fleshed out, more like a real character. But that is just my humble opinion. So next comment is from Ricky, who says, Season 3 has a lot of amazing episodes and overall an amazing season, but this is one of the lesser episodes. I mean, it's not terrible, but it's kind of boring and mediocre episode. I do like the scenes between Sisko and Jake, and I do appreciate the father and son interactions and spending time with each other, but the plot is not interesting, and again, I don't like Ducat being an ally to Sisko when he is an evil dictator and shouldn't be friends, and I think this is much worse than Season 4, But like I said, a forgettable episode with some good scenes, but nothing special. So my rating is a 4 out of 10. So next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, This is a very good Benjamin and Jake story. I like the design of the space vessel that the Bajorans used to leave their own solar system without using warp drive. I would have loved to see more episodes around the concept, but unfortunately there was something called the Dominion War, and Jake was relegated to a recurring character. The Siskos, which will include Cassidy Yates, was way more enjoyable to watch than the boring Crushers. Jake Sisko is moving to Middle Earth next year to live near the beach as a tenant is being asked to move out by Saruman. The part of the station was okay. If it wasn't for the sing-along, I would have drank myself into a coma. Why was Gul Dukat doing in this episode, as it makes no sense? I have made a new title for the Cardassian person, Gul Dukat of all trades. An episode in the season 5, he will get a new job. President of the Cardassian, which is stupid, but for the plot, it has to be Gul Dukat. I guess you've already reviewed that episode I'm talking about. Actually, I haven't. Just to let you know. Gul Dukat must have a tracking device on Sisko. That is why he always seems to pop out of nowhere. Have you reviewed By Infernal's Lights or Waltz? And knowing my luck, the answer is yes. So my rating is 7. O'Brien, Bashir, and Mark singing. I'm not going to sing because I don't know the tune. Sorry. I'm not up to this challenge. Bring me my chariots of fire. I will not cease from a mental flight. Not shall my sword sleep in hand till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. When I first met you, I hated you, and now I don't, out of 10. So you bring up a very important line, which I can't believe I forgot, which was, again, another amazing moment between Bashir and O'Brien, when O'Brien's like, well, people either love you or hate you. And when I first met you, I hated you. And now, and Bashir's like, and now I don't. And I mean that from the heart. I really don't hate you anymore. I love how he's like too afraid to say I love you. Again, it's kind of, you do think though in 24th century they would be over this male insecurity, but maybe it still exists. The people are too afraid to use words like that in the plutonic way because they don't want to be seen as gay. That seems more like a modern thing to me. But to be fair to O'Brien, it's probably not because he's afraid of being seen as gay. It's probably more to do with he's just insecure with his feelings and doesn't want Bashir to think too highly, doesn't want Bashir to know because he doesn't want his ego to be inflated too much. But, may have more to do with that, but still. There's some other episodes where I think they kind of toy with this a bit, but I'm not a huge fan of that personally. But anyway, have I reviewed By Infernal's Lights or Waltz? No and yes. I haven't done By Infernal's Lights, or was the other one in Purgatory's Shadow, which I am going to do as one video because it's a two-parter. But I haven't done that yet. But I have done Waltz a long time ago, one of the first reviews I did. So, unfortunately, you'll have to tack on your comments for Waltz in another for another video because I already reviewed it. Sorry, but you will get to do full comment for By Infernal's Light. So there you go. Now, as for the song Jerusalem, so originally they wanted to do Space Oddity by David Bowie. Or they wanted to do Rocket Man by Elton John. Or they also thought of doing Louie Louie. But the problem with all of those songs is too much money. They got to buy the rights, and they were too cheap to do that. It's funny because they did dish out for Jimi Hendrix. They played Jimi Hendrix's song Joe in past tense. But if you watch it on streaming, you might not hear it because apparently they didn't have the rights for streaming. So if you watch past tense in streaming, it's just some generic guitar music that actually sounds terrible. But if you had the DVD, or if you watched it live when it first aired, you would have heard Jimi Hendrix. But anyway, apparently it was Alexander Siddig and Kalmini's suggestion to do Jerusalem, which is Creative Commons. It's old enough to not cost any money, and they both knew the song. So I wouldn't know the song. So that's why they did that. Because Star Trek does stick with all these older songs, and it makes it feel a bit silly. Why don't they listen to songs that are more modern? Which modern track will fix. And I know some people complained about it, but for me, it makes more sense. They're more willing to dish out the cash. But anyway, although like the Discovery episode where they're like having a party listening to like 2000s hip hop, like, I don't know. That was that seemed off to me, but whatever. Anyway, I guess it's probably no more off than them constantly like quoting Shakespeare and listening to like singing these old shanties. We're being honest. But anyway, next comment is from Brandon Neal Howes. That says, I was relieved when I saw this was the next episode that Mark wanted comments on, and then I saw Leeta and her fake cough and Bashir getting the news about the woman who would beat him at school, and I put my head in my hands and sighed. How often do Ben and Jake see each other? Because Jake is surprised by Ben's goatee. Alright, I'm going to pause here because they actually did explain that in the episode that Benjamin Sisko went off on some, I think he went to Bajoran for some conference, whatever, and he was gone like a week or so, and then he came back. So that explains why Jake was surprised by the goatee. So anyway, sorry, I'll keep going. I do like Ben Sisko building an old-style Bajoran space glider and going to Cardassia with Jake. I wonder how the Siskos evacuate waste and why the ship doesn't fly to pieces just before it goes into warp. Was Gul Dukat threatening Sisko before the trip? And surely Dukat would prefer to hide the finding of an old Bajoran sailor ship given his attitude towards Bajorans. How do space fireworks actually work? Julian Bashir is still a pretty insecure, immature person. Why does it matter who came first in this class? I wasn't still worrying about such things when I turned 30. Well, good for you, Brandon, because I was. But anyway, sorry. I did like Miles and Julian getting shit-faced and singing Jerusalem together. They wanted to sing a different song, but Jerusalem is in the public domain. Jake defies his admittance to the school in New Zealand. Hey, Mark, did you do that too? The whole Elizabeth lens, I thought you were Andorian, valedictorian plot should have been cut. 7 Cardassian ministry for the reputation of Bajoran fairy tales out of 10. I did not defer. I actually did go. It wasn't a writing school, though. It was an actual university, but I had an English minor and a media studies major. So I did take a couple of writing courses, and I didn't find them very helpful, if I'm being honest, but that's different than going to a full-on writing school. I did go to a full-on film school, but that is different. And it was in Wellington, New Zealand. The film school was, anyway. So that's Wellington. Awesome city. But anyway, yeah, you and I don't really see eye to eye on this episode. Almost exact opposites. You like the A plot better. I like the B plot better. Let's call the whole thing off. But that's all good. That's fine. I think that I think the storyline with Julian is great. I think it's relatable. Maybe as speaks poorly to me that I can relate to it so much, but I just find it so relatable. I found the go away thing hilarious. I found the drinking scene great, one of the best O'Brien and Bashir scenes. This A plot has some good character stories with Ben and Jake, a few, but other than that, it was just a wash. It was a dumb thread of the week. It was stupid Bajoran's Questor spaceship thing that I couldn't care less about. But that is just my humble. Anyway, thank you, patrons, so much for your comments. So my rating for Explorers out of 10 is going to be a 6. Good. I think in the past I probably gave this episode a negative rating, maybe a 4 or 5. but I am bumping this up to a 6 because of the B plot. I'm sorry, but I am. I love the B plot. I think it was great. A great character story for Bashir. Great O'Brien Bashir moment. It was totally relatable to me, the way he was all nervous around this woman that he thought outdid him, but in fact, and was snubbing him, but in fact she didn't actually know who he was. Like, that was a great storyline, and the whole thing at the start with the typing on the pad go away, I thought was like brilliant. And the A plot, to be fair, had some good scenes between Jake and Benjamin, the good father-son bonding, but other than that, it sucked and it was boring. So 6 out of 10 for me for Explorers. So that is it for my review of the old Explorers there. If you enjoyed this review, please be sure to leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. Helps out the channel a lot, tremendously. And if you would really like to support the channel, you could consider supporting me on Patreon. There is a link in the description below. There's different rewards for different tiers. There's different rewards, such as Patreon-only series of videos I do exclusively for my Patreon supporters, where I revisit reviews that I made before. You can make comments on the videos that I'll read, like I just did, or request a video for me to do, or get pre-releases, stuff like that. You can check it out if you're interested. Alright, so let's see what's coming up on the old channel. Thursday will be my review for the Voyager episode Faces. On Saturday, I'll be doing a Patreon requested video, the top 5 best and worst Star Trek plot twists. And next Monday, I'll be back to DS9 reviewing the episode Family Business. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Voyager and many other videos on Star Trek and other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.